My parents kicked me out to give my room to my sister's new husband. So I moved cities and never answered their calls. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and I've always tried to do right by my family. Growing up, I learned early that life in our house was a balancing act, one where I carried most of the weight, while my younger sister seemed to glide through without ever touching the floor. Our family wasn't rich by any means. Every month felt like a calculation, a juggling act between bills, groceries, and repairs. And more often than not, I was the one juggling, the one taking extra shifts at work just to make sure the lights stayed on and the rent was paid. My sister, Emily, meanwhile, had this uncanny ability to charm our parents, slipping out of chores and deadlines while I quietly swept up after her messes, literal and metaphorical. Mom was always emotionally present, but only in the ways that mattered to her. She had a knack for guilt tripping, for asking questions in a tone that left me defending myself even when I hadn't done anything wrong. Dad was quiet, rarely stepping in, content to let Mom steer the ship while I rowed. I remember countless nights lying in my room, listening to the muffled sound of Mom fussing over Emily's homework or weekend plans, feeling my own accomplishments shrink in the shadows. I worked long hours, skipped weekends with friends, sometimes even delayed pursuing hobbies I loved, because there was always some bill, some repair, some errand that needed me. I told myself it was fine. That family always came first. Lately, though, things had shifted. Emily had gotten engaged, and suddenly the entire house buzzed with excitement that didn't include me. Mom was flipping through bridal magazines at the kitchen table, Dad helping pick out furniture for the new couple's apartment, while I was reminded again that my place in their priorities was conditional. I tried to smile, tried to congratulate her genuinely, but a pit of unease had started to form in my stomach. It wasn't that I didn't want her to be happy. I did. But there was this subtle undercurrent, a whisper in the back of my mind telling me that, after years of sacrifices, I might be the one getting pushed aside. And somehow, I had a feeling I was right. But I didn't know how bad it was going to get. I remembered the day they told me Emily was getting married, like it had been written on a calendar for everyone but me. The house was buzzing with plans. Mom excitedly scrolling through wedding venues on her tablet, Dad making lists of furniture and small home improvements, and Emily chattering nonstop about colors, flowers, and seating arrangements. I tried to be genuinely happy for her, nodding along, offering compliments where I could, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being invisible. Every laugh, every shared glance between Mom and Emily made me feel like I was a ghost in my own home. Then came the casual remarks that cut deeper than they probably intended. Mom mentioned that Emily's fiancé would need space in the house before their big move. Dad added, almost as an afterthought, that I should start thinking about my own living arrangements. "It's not forever," Mom said softly. "Just until they're settled." But the way she said it made it feel like a verdict rather than a suggestion. My chest tightened. I'd spent years keeping this house running, paying bills, fixing things, making sure everyone else's life was easier. And now, I was supposed to just step aside? I tried to laugh it off. "Sure, I'll figure something out," I muttered, forcing a smile while my stomach churned. Emily didn't even look up from her phone. Dad scratched his head, clearly uncomfortable, but said nothing. The tension was thick, almost tangible, like the walls themselves were pressing me out. That night, I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, replaying their words over and over. I kept asking myself how loyalty and years of sacrifice could be dismissed so casually. But what hurt the most wasn't the thought of leaving. It was realizing that my parents seemed to think it was normal, even expected. It wasn't just the room they were asking me to give up. It was like they were slowly erasing my place in the family. And as I closed my eyes that night, a small, sinking dread took hold. Maybe this was just the beginning, and I had no idea how far it would go. The next morning, things got real. Mom sat me down at the kitchen table, her hands folded neatly in front of her, a kind of practiced patience plastered on her face. "We've been thinking," she started, her voice soft but firm. "Emily and Mark will need the spare room. It's just temporary, but you'll need to make other arrangements." I blinked at her, trying to process the words. "Wait, you mean I have to leave my room? The one I've had since I was 12? My voice probably cracked, but I didn't care. Dad shuffled his feet, avoiding my gaze. "We thought it would be easier this way," he mumbled. No passion, no defense, just a quiet shrug that made it feel like I was being handed a sentence rather than asked to cooperate. I felt anger coil tight in my chest. "Easier? For who? For Emily? For you?" Mom's eyes softened as she tilted her head, the way she always did when she wanted me to feel guilty instead of angry. "We just want what's best for the family," she said. as if that one line could erase all the years I'd spent supporting them, putting their needs first. I wanted to shout, to tell her that family isn't just convenience, that loyalty doesn't have an expiration date, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I packed my frustration into a quiet, simmering silence. Emily barely looked up from her phone, and Mark, her fiancé, was oblivious to the tension swirling in the room. My belongings felt heavier than ever as I imagined taking them somewhere else, starting over in a space that wasn't mine. The humiliation stung deeper than I expected. Every childhood memory, every weekend spent running errands, every late night balancing bills and keeping the household running, they all seemed meaningless now. And yet, as I stood there in my half-packed room, a strange clarity settled in. If my parents could so casually dismiss me, maybe it was time I started thinking about myself for once. But even as that thought sparked, a gnawing worry lingered. How far would they go to make me disappear from their picture completely? I didn't have an answer, and that uncertainty hung in the air like a storm about to break. Packing my things felt like dismantling a part of myself. Every drawer I emptied, every poster I peeled off the walls, every little trinket I wrapped in paper reminded me of all the years I'd spent in that room. Years of growing up, sacrificing, and silently holding the family together. Emily's laughter floated down the hallway as she talked with Mom about the wedding plans, completely oblivious to the storm raging inside me. Even Dad seemed distant, like a passive observer, watching me be uprooted from the life I had known. As I folded my clothes into worn suitcases, I caught glimpses of the past. My first job paycheck pinned to the corkboard, letters from friends I had moved away from to help at home, small trophies and photos Mom had never acknowledged beyond a passing good job. And then I noticed it. Emily had quietly taken some of my things, little keepsakes she claimed she wanted for the room, telling Mom they'd look nice for Mark. My stomach dropped, a mix of betrayal and disbelief twisting in my chest. She hadn't just taken my room, she was taking pieces of me too, with the full support of our parents. I tried to stay calm, tried to reason with myself. "It's just a room. I can get another place," I whispered to no one, but the words felt hollow. My childhood home, the space that had been mine for years, was no longer mine. The very walls that had witnessed my sacrifices, my lonely nights, my quiet victories, they were now staging grounds for someone else's happiness. It hurt in a way I hadn't anticipated. By the time I closed the door behind me, my room stripped bare. I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and defiance. I was leaving, yes, but I wasn't broken. I realized, for the first time, that I had a choice. I could let this betrayal define me, or I could start building a life that wasn't measured by the whims of my family. Still, as I stepped into the cool evening air, lugging the last of my suitcases down the street, a shadow of doubt crept in. Could I really start over, truly cut ties, and walk away from the only home I'd ever known? The city felt alien the moment I arrived. The streets were crowded, the lights harsh, and the apartment I'd rented was tiny, barely enough room for a bed and a desk. But it was mine. Mine in a way that my old room never truly had been, despite all the years I spent there. The hum of traffic outside my window was deafening at first, and the smell of the nearby cafe downstairs made me feel both lonely and oddly alive. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of someone else's expectations. Setting up my little apartment, I unpacked the essentials and placed a few of my remaining personal items carefully around the space. Every object, no matter how small, felt like a declaration. I existed on my own terms now. And yet, there was a gnawing ache in the pit of my stomach. The walls were bare, but memories from home kept echoing through my mind. Mom's disappointed looks, Dad's silence, Emily's smug smile as she moved in with Mark. I had given so much, and now it felt like none of it mattered. Money was tight. The extra shifts I had taken at my old job didn't stretch far in this new city. Every bill I paid made me flinch. Every unfamiliar sound outside my window made me jump. I missed the familiarity of home, the small routines, even the arguments I thought I hated. But underneath the anxiety, there was a fragile sense of relief. Relief that I was free from the manipulations, from being the family's perpetual doormat. Still, the phone sat silent in my pocket. Calls from home went unanswered. Part of me wanted to scream at them, to demand recognition for years of sacrifice. Another part wanted to cry and run back, hoping for a scrap of apology or understanding that I knew would never come. I let the silence linger, letting it be a boundary, a first act of self-preservation. As I lay in my new bed that night, exhausted from the day and the emotional weight of leaving everything behind, I realized something. I was truly alone. But maybe, just maybe, This was the first step toward being myself. And yet, a cold thought lingered in my mind. What if cutting ties wasn't enough? What if the past followed me, no matter how far I ran? The first few weeks in the city were a mix of exhilaration and grinding anxiety. I found a steady job, though it paid just enough to cover rent, groceries, and the occasional small luxury I allowed myself, like a cup of coffee from the cafe downstairs or a cheap potted plant from my apartment window. Every morning, I'd wake up to the hum of the city, a sound that felt foreign yet liberating, a constant reminder that I was finally making decisions for myself. No one was there to criticize my choices, to remind me of how lucky I was to have them, or to guilt me into doing something I didn't want. For the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of ownership over my own life, but freedom didn't erase the ache. The calls from Mom and Dad went straight to voicemail. Messages from Emily, too, landed like small knives, thinly veiled jabs masked as casual check-ins. "Hope the new city's treating you well," one text read, but I could feel the subtle mockery lurking beneath the words. I considered replying, just to defend myself, to remind them of all the years I'd sacrificed. But something had shifted inside me. I realized that any response would be giving them power over me again, and I wasn't willing to surrender it. Then came the unexpected call from Emily herself, halfway through the month. "You're being dramatic," she said casually, almost laughing. "It's just a room. We all have to make compromises for the family, you know?" I gritted my teeth, feeling a surge of old anger mixing with disbelief. How could she say that after everything? I wanted to throw the phone, to scream, to tell her exactly what years of my loyalty had meant. But instead, I hung up. No explanation, no apology, just silence. That night, I sat by the window, looking down at the city lights, letting the sound of traffic fill the silence. I realized something crucial. My parents and sister might never understand, might never see the depth of their betrayal. And if they never did, then I had to stop waiting for them to. I had to survive, thrive, and define my worth on my own terms. Yet even as I embraced this newfound independence, a sliver of doubt lingered. Was I strong enough to never look back, to let them fade completely from my life? It was about 2 months into my new life when I got the news that pushed me over the edge. I'd been adjusting, slowly building routines, making friends at work, and finally starting to feel like I belonged somewhere again. And then, a neighbor mentioned seeing my childhood things. Boxes, old books, trinkets, being moved out of my old room. My stomach sank. I called Mom, my voice shaking, asking what had happened, only to hear her casual, dismissive tone. "Oh, we gave some of your things to Emily and Mark. They'll make the room feel more like theirs." I couldn't breathe for a moment. "You, what? Without asking me?" I stammered, my hands gripping the phone as if I could pull the words back into me. There was a pause. "Well, we thought it would be nice," she said lightly, like she was offering me a cup of tea instead of stripping me of memories and childhood possessions. I could hear the faint clatter of Emily's laughter in the background, probably showing off a lamp or a framed photo that had belonged to me. I hung up before I could say anything else. For hours, I sat on my small apartment floor, staring at the bare walls around me. Anger, hurt, disbelief. They churned together in a storm that I couldn't contain. Every sacrifice, every late night working to keep the household afloat, every favor I'd done without complaint. It all felt meaningless. And yet, the realization struck me even harder. This wasn't just a room or a few trinkets. This was a pattern. They didn't see me as a person. I was just a fixture, something to be moved or discarded as it suited them. That night, the city lights outside my window blurred as I thought about every moment I'd given to them, every argument I'd swallowed, every guilt trip I'd endured. And somewhere deep down, anger mixed with clarity. I would never allow myself to be that expendable again. I couldn't. I would make a life where I wasn't defined by their whims, where I wasn't invisible. But even as I clenched my fists in determination, a creeping sense of loneliness settled over me. Could I really build a new life from scratch, completely on my own, without the support or interference of the people who had shaped so much of who I was? By the time I hit the 3-month mark in the city, something had started to shift. The anxiety that had clung to me like a shadow began to loosen. I was learning the rhythm of this new place. The way the bus rumbled past my apartment in the mornings, the smell of freshly baked bread from the cafe downstairs, the chatter of neighbors who didn't care who I was or where I came from. I decorated my little space with the things I had salvaged, each item a small rebellion against the life I'd left behind. A plant on the windowsill, a photo of a friend I had made here, a notebook filled with plans and dreams I was finally allowed to pursue. Work was getting easier too. I had found a rhythm, started taking on more responsibility, and with it came a sense of pride that I hadn't felt in years. For once, my efforts mattered for me, not as a measure of how useful I could be to my family. The solitude was comforting, even soothing at times. I could make decisions, spend money, and plan my weekends without a single guilt-laden glance from Mom or an offhanded jab from Emily. I was slowly realizing that independence had a taste I'd never experienced before. Bitter, sharp, but exhilarating. And yet, the past refused to stay buried. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from Emily. "Hope the city's treating you well. Don't be so dramatic," it read. My hands tightened around the phone, the words slicing sharper than I expected. She hadn't just dismissed me. She had mocked me, minimizing everything I had been through. My chest tightened with a mix of anger and disbelief. I thought about replying, screaming back, letting her know how wrong she was. But I didn't. I realized that silence was my shield now. Responding would only give her and Mom the control they had taken from me for so long. I sank onto my couch, letting the city hum around me. For the first time, I could see that my life here, my choices, my independence, was becoming something real. But in the quiet moments, I couldn't help wondering, could I ever fully let go of them? Or would the shadow of betrayal always follow me, no matter how far I ran? It was during the 5th month that I hit my lowest point. I'd been juggling extra hours at work to cover unexpected expenses, and one evening, after a particularly grueling 12-hour shift, I got the call that made my chest tighten like a vice. My landlord had miscalculated the rent, and suddenly I was facing a steep, late fee I couldn't afford. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the peeling paint on the walls, the faint smell of coffee lingering from the morning, and felt completely alone. The city that had seemed so full of possibility now felt suffocating, alien, and indifferent. For the first time, the loneliness wasn't just emotional, it was tangible. I wanted to call Mom or Dad, even just to hear a familiar voice, but the phone stayed in my lap. Emily's mocking texts and their dismissive treatment kept flashing in my mind. "You're being dramatic," she had said. And now, in this moment of vulnerability, those words felt like nails in my chest. Every decision I'd made to protect myself, every boundary I'd set, seemed meaningless against the crushing weight of being completely on my own. I thought back to my old room, to the childhood memories, the comfort of knowing my space was mine, no matter how small or unappreciated. And then I realized I had given all of that up for nothing, or at least that's how it felt in that moment. Anger, grief, and despair collided in a storm I couldn't escape. I curled up on the floor, the city noises outside blurred into a background hum, feeling smaller than I had in years. But even in that darkness, a faint ember of resolve remained. I refused to let this break me entirely. I would survive this, even if it killed me. I just didn't yet know how. And as I stared out the window into the indifferent city lights, I couldn't shake the thought that my life was at a turning point, and that the hardest part, the real fight, was just beginning. Slowly, the pieces began to shift. After hitting that rock bottom, I forced myself to take control, bit by bit. I picked up extra shifts at work. Yes, but this time with purpose. Not out of obligation, not to survive someone else's expectations, but to build something of my own. I found a rhythm in the chaos. Early mornings with coffee in hand, evenings spent decorating my apartment, weekends exploring the city streets I now called mine. For the first time, I felt the faint stirrings of pride that weren't tied to pleasing anyone but myself. The loneliness persisted, but it became more tolerable. I started connecting with coworkers outside of the office, grabbing lunch or coffee, and slowly weaving a small circle of people who didn't judge me for my past, who didn't measure me by sacrifices made for a family that didn't see me. I began to enjoy my own company, reading books, planning my week, feeling the thrill of autonomy in ways I never had before. Each small victory, each bill paid without dread. Each night I returned to a home I had made my own. It reinforced that I could survive without them. Occasionally, my phone buzzed with messages from Emily or calls from Mom, thinly veiled attempts to draw me back into their orbit. I ignored them. No explanation, no confrontation, just silence. Every time, the relief was palpable. I was learning that my worth wasn't determined by their recognition, that my life didn't need their approval to be valid. And yet, as I walked through the city at night, the streetlights reflecting off wet asphalt, I couldn't fully shake the past. I thought about the betrayal, the stolen room, the disregarded sacrifices, and I realized that my anger hadn't completely faded. It was a reminder, sharp constant, that I had to continue building, continue growing, continue proving to myself that I was more than what they thought of me. But even as I started to feel strong, a whisper of doubt lingered. Would they ever stop trying to pull me back? Or was this independence something I would have to guard forever? It happened sooner than I expected, an attempt at confrontation from my parents. I got a call from Dad, hesitant and quiet, asking if I could come over for a family discussion. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something in his voice, the familiar tremor of worry, made me pause. Against my better judgment, I agreed, figuring maybe it was finally time to speak my truth. When I arrived, Mom was already there, her expression carefully neutral, like she had rehearsed this moment countless times. Emily hovered behind her, arms crossed, smirking as if she'd already won. I took a deep breath and sat down, the air thick with tension. Mom started softly. "We just want to understand why you've distanced yourself." I cut her off, voice steady but cold. "Understand? You don't understand. You never did. Years of sacrifices, unpaid favors, constant support. You never acknowledged any of it. And now, you want to lecture me about distance?" Dad opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. "No, this isn't about lecturing. This is about explaining to you why I can't let you manipulate me anymore. Why I won't be invisible or disposable." I saw the guilt flash in Mom's eyes for a moment, but Emily rolled hers, muttering something about dramatic overreactions. That set off a final spark of anger inside me. I realized they were incapable of seeing me as anything other than a tool, a stepping stone for Emily's happiness. I stood up, my chest tight but resolute. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to leave. I will not let you control my life, my choices, or my happiness ever again." And with that, I walked out, the click of the door behind me echoing like a bell marking my freedom. Outside, the city felt larger than ever, more alive, and infinitely mine. I had confronted the past, faced them directly, and refused to compromise my dignity. But as I merged into the crowd of lights and noise, a flicker of unease remained. What would it take for them to finally accept that I was gone, truly gone, from their lives? Months had passed since that confrontation, and the distance I had created felt like a protective shield. I had built a life I could be proud of, steady work, friends who valued me, an apartment that was mine in every sense. I woke up to my own decisions, my own schedule, my own rules. The city that once felt overwhelming now felt like home, buzzing with possibility and freedom. For the first time in my life, I felt truly in control of my destiny, not defined by the whims or expectations of my family. Occasionally, my phone would light up with messages from Mom, Dad, or even Emily, attempting casual check-ins, thinly veiled with guilt or manipulation. I didn't respond. Each time I saw their names flash, I reminded myself that my worth wasn't contingent on their approval. I had learned to let go of the longing for validation that had haunted me for years. Every unanswered message, every ignored call, became a quiet act of reclaiming my life. One evening, I stood by my window, looking out at the city lights reflecting off wet streets, and felt a sense of calm I had never known at home. I thought about the years of sacrifice, the heartbreak, and the betrayals, and realized I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. I had turned the pain they caused into fuel, building resilience and self-respect in its place. The anger had softened into clarity, the hurt into wisdom, and the loneliness into empowerment. And then, a small, ironic twist. I saw a notification that Emily had tagged Mom and Dad in a photo of her new apartment, proudly showing off a room that had once been mine. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old frustration, but it quickly passed. I smiled, sipping my coffee, knowing that no matter what they did, my life was fully mine now. I had left, I had fought, and I had rebuilt. The past no longer held me hostage. I was free, finally whole, and untouchable by those who once tried to define me. And for the first time, I could look forward without fear, knowing I would never let anyone take that from me again.